Hello, and welcome to this week's lecture on graphic novels. Graphic novels, I'm using this term, and I'll explore the names a little bit more, but I'm using this term as kind of a big overview for several different things. But basically, graphic novels, when we talk about them, we talk about a format and not a genre. I'm going to show you nonfiction graphic novels, historical fiction graphic novels, autobiographical graphic novels, and fiction. So there's a wide variety. Anything that we've talked about up till now could be in a graphic novel. The definition by Scott McCloud in his book from 1994, and I can't think of the title, but it's very good, is for comics, which basically are what graphic novels come out of. Juxtapose pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence intended to convey information, so nonfiction, and or to produce an aesthetic response in the viewer, fiction. So it's a different kind of reading that requires different skills, such as image analysis and reading print and image together. I find it much more difficult. A lot of readers find it easier, especially younger readers. I find it more difficult because I'm a very linear reader, and these are much less linear and just straight paragraph reading. But it's very engaging for a lot of readers. It can help with vocabulary development. Often the vocabulary level is a little higher, and it can be because of the visual clues that are within the pictures. Often, like, picture books are at a much higher vocabulary level and a much higher lexile level because they're meant to be read aloud. And often students, beginning readers often take picture books and make their own stories or infer infer what's going on from the reading the images. And this can happen in graphic novels, but on a much higher level. And certainly it can help with somebody who's already reading but struggling to read because the clues are there to help with the words. And we'll talk a little bit more later on about why these are useful for readers who are struggling. But let's talk about types of comics, if we want to use a bigger word. There's the comic strip, short comics like those we know in the newspaper, classics like Peanuts, up-to-date ones like Frazz, whatever you see in the newspaper on a daily basis or on Sundays, comic strips. Comic book is kind of a short story form, often superheroes. I remember when I was younger, Archie and Veronica, who are back again, I think are even back. Isn't there a Riverdale TV show now or something? But Archie and Veronica, I remember those comic books. So comic books have been around for a long time and have often been looked at as not reading, which we'll talk a little bit about later. Graphic novel is kind of the newer, so to speak, term of a long form comic book. It could be either a single story, like Mouse was one of the early famous graphic novels, which is now many, many years ago, 80s maybe, but told the story of his father as Art Spiegelman, of his father as a Holocaust survivor. Or it could be a compilation. Often, sometimes a graphic novel could be comic books put together in, an arc of a series of comic books put together in a graphic novel form. Trade paperbacks are more often an anthology of previously printed comic books, although those are sometimes called graphic novels if they're hardcover. And then manga is Japanese graphic novels, sometimes read back to front. And with manga but not print is anime. It took me a while to get those two terms straight. Manga's the print, anime's the video. So those are kind of some words, some types of comics, or the whole genre is more often referred to as graphic novels now. This is Dragon Ball Z was quite popular for a long time as manga. I just wanted to provide an example of manga. And as a matter of fact, Viz Media, which produces a lot of manga, has some chapters that are free. This one is The Year with Emperor, about an emperor penguin. And if you notice, Japanese manga is read the opposite way. So you can see that the arrow here says read this way. So we're going to go, you are going to read from what we would consider the back of the novel to the front. And if you look at you can't tell from this picture, but you would open it on this side instead of opening it on this side. So you can point your students to reading some of these novels online through Viz Media, and Viz Media does a lot of manga and makes, I think they're Dragon Ball Z, and there's a ton of them. And there's a lot to learn about manga that I don't know, that I have to ask my son about, but it's just something to be aware of. They're also quite long. See, this is on volume 26, and they tend to not be uniform in their grade levels. So you kind of have to buy the series knowing if, like, you're in middle school, the series may eventually age out and not be appropriate for middle school anymore. This is from Thomson, 2008, Conventions of Graphica, and just some conventions that are used within comics and graphic novels, such as speech bubbles and thought bubbles. We're all familiar with these from our regular comics. This was put together by a group of third graders just to talk about, to learn. You could have a class do this with you so that they understand and can articulate the elements of graphic novels. Narrative boxes are usually help tell the story or give you time. They're often time related or place related. The lettering is really interesting. It's usually in all caps, but it can be in lowercase, bolded, italics. It can be creative, and it can really add to the story how the person chooses to letter. And I'm going to show you an example of that. Gutters and panels. Panels are the little boxes that hold the picture, and the gutters are where you read between the lines. So what happens between this image and this image? You have to kind of read between the lines, fill in the story, understand what's going on from one panel to the next. And then the pictures are in the panels and show the story. It's similar to picture books. The two are often used together to tell the story, and you need both, and they rely on each other, and the images can add to the text, and the text can add to the images. They can be all different kinds of form, art styles, have action. I think there's even some I've seen with photographs that have art over them. So, or there's just no limit to what kind of artwork can be in the panels. So, for example, this is a good example of panels and gutters in a pretty classic layout for a comic. And this is the Odyssey. I'm going to show you the covers in a few minutes. And you have to kind of, go along with the story, what he's looking at, look at this, and then infer that this is what he's looking at, and kind of read the story along and through the gutters and the panels and the gutters. This one talks about, this is after the deluge, AD, after the deluge, about Hurricane Katrina. And here's where you see the narrative boxes giving you time. It's telling the story of several places. This actually gives you time and the place. The book is describing what's going on during Hurricane Katrina at several times and places throughout the city. So 8:01 Uptown, 8:09 a.m. Central City. So it places you and gives you a place, guides you through the timing. And also the speech bubbles here, you can see this has like kind of the little lightning thing that means it's coming out of TV or a radio, in this case a radio. This one is called Stitches by David Small. It's really, David Small illustrated some gorgeous picture books that I just love. The Gardener, there's a couple other ones, and this is his autobiography. He had a terrible childhood where his father was a doctor, and they had a x-ray machine in their basement. He kept x-raying him and wound up giving him cancer of the throat, and he had to be operated on. It's not for the faint of heart, but you can see that this uses a totally different style of lettering compared to this very controlled lettering in AD. This is done freehand. It's not encased in bubbles, and it just gives you a different feel and adds a different impact. So even the lettering is part of the visual part of the story that you need to interpret in order to read the graphic novel. So there's Stitches, AD After the Deluge, which definitely for older, it's got some swear words in it, and this is a lovely graphic retelling of the Odyssey, which was the first panel that I showed you with the panels and gutters. So I just want to show you some different graphic novels for different ages. Baby Mouse was really popular, and for grades 2 to 5, really very popular for a while. Owl is wordless for grades 2 to 5, and so it doesn't so much help with the reading, but it is very enjoyable and could be used for writing prompts also, much like I indicated for Weisner with his picture books. You can have the students write the story here. To Dance, this is a great novel. It's an autobiographical novel about a ballerina. Sienna Cherson Siegel was actually a ballerina from Puerto Rico, and she, I think, went to ABT and then worked with Balanchine. And her husband did the artwork on this. So you can see how we can really get a feel for the story through both her words and the artwork that goes along with it, telling her story of what it's like to be a young ballerina. This one's for teens, and it is a fictional story of the Boxer Rebellion in China in 1898, and you can buy these books separately, but they also come boxed together. And the Boxer Rebellion had to do with the missionaries coming in and trying to convert the Chinese to Christianity and rebelling against the Western influence. So each book follows a character, one that is converted to Christianity and one who's fighting for the Boxers. And at a point in each of the books, the two stories overlap, and you see the other character from the other book. And here is just knocked my socks off. This one, I loving historical fiction. This one just blew me away, especially since it's from a little older era. I tend to like anything in the 1800s and before. Persepolis, of course, been around for a long time, and this is definitely for teens. It's growing up in Iran during the Islamic Revolution. So it's, again, autobiographical, the actual story of her childhood. This one is one of the, it's old. I didn't even write down when it's from, but Joe Kubert, who is worked on Marvel, I think, and has or had a drawing school in Dover, I want to say, wrote this at the time of the Sarajevo conflict, when his people he knew were in Sarajevo, trapped in Sarajevo, and were under bombardment, and were faxing. I mean, this tells you how long ago it was. It wasn't trying to connect through Twitter or cell phones. It was pre-cell phones, and in order to get his story out, the people who were trapped, the artist who was trapped in the Sarajevo, would fax to his friend, to Kubert and other people, and it's the story based on the faxes, and the actual faxes are included. So a great primary source, looking at how primary source documents can be included in historical stories. This is also nonfiction. It's let's see if this link still works, called Economics, and it explains. It's definitely for teens, explains how the economy works, but is a little easier to grasp with illustrations because it gives a concrete way of absorbing the information. I showed this at a presentation of teachers, and they decided it really could be used as a textbook. They were immediately engaged, even though the title kind of turned them off, because who really gets excited about economics unless you're an economics major, or unless you're being affected by economics. But it's really interesting how well this was given a starred review, and gives an idea of the historical, an idea of what went on in the past in the United States economically, and explains economic terms. So it's really interesting how you could use something like this for a textbook and for understanding a really difficult subject. This one is a little younger. This is kind of fictionalized nonfiction. There is dialogue in it, but it tells a true story about the Donner Group that went over the Donner Pass, and they were accused of cannibalism because they got stuck going over the pass from the plains and trying to get to California and the Pacific Coast in the 1800s. So these Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales, they give a kind of use a framing of him telling tales, Nathan Hale telling tales about different aspects of history. And actually, I really find this sheet, I think this would be interesting to some students, because it would, who died and who survived, and it gives a little legend of how they died. So accidental shooting, this is starvation or exposure, murdered, unknown, cannibalized, who they thought was cannibalized. Some died of tuberculosis, so you can kind of get in this two-page spread an idea of what happened to everybody who started out in the Donner Party. Rather gruesome, but I can see a certain segment of grades 3 to 7 finding it fascinating. This is a new book. It's not a new book. I think it's on a Kindle platform or on an Amazon platform, but I've been reading about it recently, and it's written by Chip Reese. About his son has Down syndrome, so he wanted to create a comic book that starred somebody with Down syndrome. So I haven't read this, but Ollie, a boy with Down syndrome, wants to have powers just like his superhero dad, but with congenital heart defects, which is often something that happens with Down syndrome. His father has no intention of letting his son get in harm's way. Enter Metamakers, a company run by an egomaniac that promises to give Ollie the superpowers he so desires, but at what cost? So this is getting a lot of good press for featuring a character with Down syndrome, written by somebody whose son has Down syndrome. It's not completely from within the group. I mean, it's not somebody who actually has Down syndrome themselves, but certainly somebody who is aware of what goes on with Down syndromes and has raised a Down syndrome child, and it wanted them to see themselves in a comic book. So graphic novels have a lot of potential for engaging students. They provide motivation to read, interest, because the pictures are so engaging, and there's a feeling that there's less text, even though it's really important to realize that there's a lot more going on than just reading just a sentence, that there's so much more imagination and reading of visual, and we'll talk a little bit about visual literacy in a second, going on when they're reading these graphic novels. So it motivates students because it appears to be more fun, it captures their interest and engages them in reading, and we want them reading. So if this engages them, I say go for it, especially when there's so many fascinating topics that you can cover with graphic novels. It helps them find main or important ideas. Because of the way it's set up, you can learn sequencing through the text. If we looked at looking at the ballerina, looking at things happening in a sequence through following the pictures. So going back, you can see one thing following another with her, and learn sequencing. For younger students, supports comprehension. The visual adds to understanding the comprehension, the reading, literacy skills, visual literacy. So let's talk a little bit about visual literacy. So visual literacy, I don't think I'm very good at visual literacy. I understand when I like something, but I cannot pick it apart. I don't understand the techniques used to create the images. I don't understand the vocabulary, shapes, and colors, and I really need to do more with this. But you can, there's a lot of cognitive skills that go into understanding everything that happens in the books that are more than just looking at a pretty picture. So, and it's also important in today's world of fake news to understand what pictures can say and what they can hide. You can go beyond just understanding literacy within comic books and take it to photographs. What does this photograph say? What's missing by cropping the photograph? Why did this person choose to focus on this in the photograph? What might be missing? There's some great lessons out there of taking a smaller photograph that's been chopped and then understanding the context from the larger photograph and why somebody might have changed it. So there's a lot that you can learn about making meaning from pictures, designs, and other images. And with computers, we're getting so visual that it really becomes important to increase your students' vocabulary and make them more familiar with images. And I think because I'm not very visually literate is why I have a harder time with really getting everything out of a graphic novel that I could get out of, and why it's not always my choice to read. There's some that I've really liked, but most of the time I turn away from them because I'm just more comfortable reading text, but which is fine as long as I can understand that I need to learn more about visual literacy and that some students take to this and are a little more intuitive. There's a basic literacy, I think, that is intuitive, but there's so much more you can learn. Molly Bang has a good book out that really delves into visual literacy, and you know what, I can't think of the name, so I'm going to try and remember to add it to the tab this week. So research with comics show that they can scaffold students toward more difficult reading, be a valuable resource for content learning. If we looked at some of the great nonfiction books we had there, offer practice with words that have multiple meanings. When a word has multiple meanings, the images will give you the clue as to which meaning to use, and can be helpful for English language learners, again, because of the contextual clues provided by the images. So some resources. YALSA has these graphic novel awards, which are very useful for older students. They have great graphic novels for teens, which is longer, and the top 10 graphic novels. Unfortunately, they did not include images of the cover, which I find very disappointing, especially in a list of graphic novels which are very visual. I want to see the covers on all of these. But it's a useful, they do one for every year. They've done it for a few years, previous top 10s, previous lists. So it's a good place to, they've mixed up their lists because the 2016 top 10 is with the great graphic novels for teens. But it can be a good place to go to find ideas for increasing if you're filling out your collection. The graphic novel lists provided by ALSC are not as updated as I would like. They're 2016, not that old, but I guess maybe they'll come out with a 2018. But reading list for younger grades, again, no pictures, but they have grades K to 2. Let's see if they have any of the Toon Books. Has a lot of the younger, they even have easy reader books. I don't know if Luke on the Loose, that might be an easy reader book. Hamster and Cheese, I think I've seen those. Those are cute. Graphic Universe. Again, you get used to First Second has a lot of, and Ben Hatke, he had something out I really liked. You get used to the publishers that tend to put out the better quality books. And then they have 3rd to 5th grade. Oh, it's also available in Spanish, This Lost in New York. Again, don't have pictures, which I would like, but you could print these out. You could print these out in grayscale or in color and have them available for your students or your teachers. So even if you don't have them in your library, they could use these to take to other libraries and find them in their public library. No Flying, No Tights is a great overall resource for reviews of comic books and manga and anime and graphic novels. They have actually one for schools, which that breaks it down to elementary, middle school, high school, and college. But they also list books and they link to an image. So here we have the cover. But there's nice reviews here that tell you about the books for the different grades. So if you're looking to increase your collection, this is a good place to go. I wanted to go back to schools. I'm just curious what they have for college. I didn't look at this before. Manga in theory. Oh, the craft of creating manga. And again, you can also do they have the kids comics here, all different, and this is what I was talking about. It's a form and not a genre, because we've discussed fantasy or historical fiction, horror as part of fantasy humor, mysteries and thrillers, nonfiction, realism, which I would imagine is their word for realistic fiction. So they have Anne of Green Gables, which I would tend to put under historical fiction. Babysitter's Club, if you guys remember those from when you were younger, they are now out in graphic novel format. And I think they also have Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys out in graphic novel format. So No Flying, No Tights is a useful place to go. They also have Comics 101 here, which actually you're going to be reading this reading lessons. I just will probably link to it from Cheng Library. And then A Guide to Using Graphic Novels with Children's and Teen. This is longer. If you want to take a look at it, I'm not going to assign it, but it's mostly, it gives you some ideas, and then it gives you a lot of, there's ads in the back here. But it might be, if you want to learn more about using comic books and about the different comic books, this has been really popular. Smile and Drama and Sisters by Raina Telgemeier. So there's a lot of possibilities here, but it's a little more. Oh, Bird and Squirrel has gotten a lot of press lately. So Goosebumps is coming to graphic novels. Interesting. I don't know if I'd want that in graphic novel format. Oh, I just wanted to point out that graphic novels are specifically mentioned in the Comic Core here. So this is the standard 10, range, quality, and complexity, includes subgenres of adventure stories, historical fiction, mysteries, myths, science fiction, realistic fiction, allegories, parodies, satires, and graphic novels. So if you want to, if you're a Common Core school and your teachers are complaining about why you have graphic novels in there, show them it's right in the Common Core. Oops. I just also wanted to mention to you that you could have your students create comics. It's a great way to have them pull the main ideas out of what they're reading. We did this in a workshop with primary sources. There's a thing that's called a jackdaw, which is basically a collection of resources, newspaper clippings, and other resources about a subject. So if you have want them to read, say, a newspaper article from a particular era, say the Civil Rights era, you can have them read the newspaper article, pull out the main ideas, and create a comic. Then you can print it. I'm going to show you some some places where they can go. If you want to, you can have them do it, you know, by hand. There's places to print out grids for the comics with the panels and the gutters, or you can have them do it on the computer. Me not being so artistic, I like this idea because anybody can go in and use the computer graphics that are already on there and create it without worrying about how bad their drawing is. I obviously have a complex about that. And then they can share it with the class, post them up in your library, post them in the classroom. So there's a couple different places that you can go to for online. This Make Beliefs Comics is free, and you can just go in and create the comic, and it gives you different panels, and you can do backgrounds, and let's see if it's let me go in. So I can just pick a character. So I actually like that. We have a woman with a hard hat, cool. And we can add a dialogued, let's see, where's our dialogue? Got to go back here. Here's our words. So we can add splat to that. We can add panels if we want additional panels. We can give it a title. There's a way to do the word balloons, so you can write in the language of your choice. There's a couple different languages. You can write in whatever language, so you can have somebody, you can use this in a language classroom to have them practice their writing skills in whatever language, and then you can name it, and I think you can email it, and you can print it. So you can move things around, move them to scale, flip them, add different size words in. You just type in the words, so it's really easy. I'm trying to remember if this one, a diverse cast of characters, so they do have Frankenstein. I don't know if I'd call that diverse, but how do I go to the end of the characters? Oh, here we I don't know, there's a way to scroll through these characters. Oh, there we go. I don't think it has as much diversity as I would really like, but there's a little diversity. Here we go. Some diversity there. I like that they have women in different, like that they have somebody with the headscarf on, and so there's some diversity there of characters, which is very nice. Oh yeah, here we go, some more. Oh, I like that, somebody in a wheelchair. So that's one of them. Read, Write, Think is another one through Read, Write, Think, and you can again just go through and make the comics. I think this one has a little more, yeah, you have a little more discretion in the type of panels. You can do the 6 panels, so you have something you can write captions, so there's a little more variety there. And then Witty Comics has a little more adult kind of figures here. I don't think they have quite as many, quite as much diversity. They're pretty stock characters, women in dresses. Oh, they do have a female policeman, so that's good. And of course your basic bunny in a tie. And then there's different backgrounds. So this just gives you a little different character feeling around what kind of cartoon comes out of it. So that is it on graphic novels and on a way to use comics within the classroom to get students to pull out the main idea. If I did this once with a class, actually in I think the reference class, and we kind of had fun with it because you can take something very dry and transpose it to this fun medium and really think about, you can't say a lot in those small little comic boxes, and you can have, if you do it not, you can add technology this way. If you do it in on paper, you can have that person who is more artistic participate that way, whereas the person who writes better participates that way if you put a group together. So there's different ways to use this. So that is my spiel on graphic novels, and I will see you on the discussion board.